My name is Lori Milliken, and this slideshow is all about an introduction to statistics. What is statistics? Well, statistics is the collection, organization, and analysis of numerical data. We use statistics for many reasons. Among those, we describe groups. We can measure and quantify associations between variables. And we can determine if groups are different from one another. We often use this when we do experimental research, which we'll talk about later in this course. Specifically, in this course, we are going to focus on inferential statistics. This is the use of statistics to make an inference or a generalization concerning some unknown aspect of a population of people. So if you look at the word inference, this is the process of drawing a conclusion based solely on what is already known. So when we do research, we measure a small group of people. That group of people comes from a larger group, the population. We make a measurement in that sample of people, and we infer something about the population from which that small group was selected. This leads us to what is a sample versus a population. So a population is all members of a defined group. Sometimes researchers focus on a specific population, maybe all women, or all men, or all adults with heart disease, or all children, or adolescent children. So it's some large group of people. The sample is a subgroup of that population. And typically when people do research, the goal is to get a random sample of people from that population that is being focused on. A random sample is one in which every member of the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. So if you look at that definition of a random sample, it is really, really difficult for researchers to get a random sample. And the reason why they want a random sample is because we really want the sample of people that we're going to make measurements on be representative of the population. Because if we're using a result that we get from a sample to say something about the population, we want to make sure the sample and population are very similar. So the sample needs to represent the population. One way to do that is to select a random sample, but this is very difficult to do. So here is the process of research. A researcher has a question that they're trying to answer, a hypothesis that they're trying to test. So they recruit a sample of people from a specific population, and sometimes the population is related to the research question. For example, most of the time if you're going to study bone loss, you're probably going to be studying a group of postmenopausal women. Or if you're going to look at heart disease, you probably want to study the people who are at the highest risk of getting heart disease. So samples of people are recruited from a population. Then measurements are made, or sometimes in experimental research, treatments are applied. The results are examined using the statistical tools which we will talk about in this class. Those tools often depend on exactly what that research question is, maybe what treatments were applied, how many experimental groups there were. Finally, a conclusion is made based on what is found in that sample. And remember, the sample is the small group of people who actually had measurements made on them. The inference is the researcher applying that conclusion to the larger population. Because really, the process of research is to say something about the larger group, the populations. But because we can't measure every single person in the population, we have to measure a sample, which is a small group selected from that population. The more representative that sample is of the population, the better our inference, or the more confidence we have in that conclusion. So these conclusions that researchers make are based on the statistical tests that are run on those data. And so these statistical tests also generate the probability that the conclusion is wrong. And this is called the level of statistical significance. Statistical significance depends on the strength of the result, how many people were measured, and the variability of those measurements. And so you should realize that everything you read in your textbooks that you consider a fact, these facts have been replicated and studied and restudied before they become accepted as a fact. Before they ever get written in your textbook, they have been researched and replicated so that we're confident that that is actually true. So in this course, here is what we're going to be doing. We will look at statistical tools used to describe data. We will look at statistical tools used to quantify and measure the strength of relationships or associations. And we will look at statistical tools used to determine whether means are different between groups. And this is usually done in the context of experimental research. We need to go a little bit more in depth on what statistical significance is. And really a main focus of this course will be to help you start reading and interpreting research articles that are published